Restorative justice looks like really centering an approach where the processes and solutions that you're building only go as fast as your relationships can go, and they honor the relationship above everything else.
I'm Carolyn Pars, communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a clean energy future without leaving anyone behind. Join me as we explore the technologies, policies, and human stories that can make clean energy not just sustainable for our planet, but accessible for everyone. Welcome to Just Power. Hi, I'm Carolyn Pars. We talk a lot about community engagement in the energy transition, a lot on Just Power, but too often it lives at the Grasstops, right? Formal hearings, an occasional email, limited processes versus the grassroots, which is getting to the very heart of what communities need and want, where the people are affected most. And this is playing out in real time right now in Denver. So make sure you check out our last show, number 5. And that is why I invited on today Mary Palmer, who is the founder of New Bayou and the director of energy equity and inclusion at Smart Electric Power Alliance. We're going to explore what real engagement looks like when it's rooted in relationships, lived experience, and agency. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Carol. It's nice to be here.
Great to have you on, and perfect timing for this interview.
Yes.
Before we get into practices and good measures of what community engagement is, I wanted to start with you, right? What experiences in your own life shaped how you think about equity today?
Honestly, really, my mom was a really big impact in my life in that space. So, my mom, when I was growing up, had kidney disease, and she was a very
Mm,
staunch advocate for improving some of the services that she had for her health, right? And a lot of people don't realize this, but the medications and all of the processes that you have to have in order to remain healthy and alive with kidney disease are only provided. Um, they're very expensive. They're very expensive, right? And so
right.
if you are not eligible for disability and services like that, then honestly, that can be the difference between life and death. And so my mom was a huge advocate. We went with her to city council meetings. We went with her to
Wow.
health. Yes, she taught us. I knew Robert's Rules of Orders before I even knew what they were called. And it just really
You
instilled
were
in
being
me, like,
groomed all along and you didn't
yes, I
even
was
know it.
being groomed and didn't know, but it was very important to her that the decisions that were being made about her health and the benefits that would help pay for her health were coming from her and others with that lived experience, and not people who frankly weren't familiar with what that was like. So that was a really big factor in my life, and really
Hmm.
helped me to understand the power of being an advocate and using your voice to influence the things that impact you the most closely. So yeah.
So thank you, Mom, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So fast forward, right? You've worked
Yeah.
inside of energy systems and policy
Mhm.
spaces, and now you're building something new.
I
What?
am.
Yeah. So what did you see or feel that told you that the traditional approaches and ways that we've been doing it just around engagement wasn't enough?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the education part um was something that stood out a lot. Like, I have been on both sides, as you mentioned. I've done a lot of work in different sectors. And I would go and as an advocate, I would notice that there was just really big gap about how systems worked and how to navigate the system and who did what. So I
Yes.
was always very passionate about helping people understand, knowing who does what is really important. If you go ask the mayor for something that the governor does, then you're not going to get very far. And so it was really creating this separation between people and creating this deep mistrust, um, when people felt like their voices weren't being heard, right? So that I'm very passionate about that education. And as far as like, and I also noticed that the solutions that were being come up with they weren't in alignment with what people really wanted. A
Mm.
lot of times someone would come in looking from the outside, which can be very valuable, by the way, but they didn't have that lived experience and they hadn't taken the time to simply go to someone and say, what top three things would be most impactful right now, right? They often would
Simple
look
as that, right?
exactly, conduct some sort of formal
Let's stop
research.
here. What top three things would
Yeah,
be most impactful for you right now? If you just ask
exactly.
that one question, it could get you so far,
So
right?
far, so far.
I love it.
Yeah. And so I just saw that and I was like, there just needs to be a different way of engaging. Having been both the person who advocated and the person who designed programs, there was just this missing piece. And that's what New Bayou is meant to solve.
Okay. So just tell us, just to give a little context about New Bio, right? You're transitioning. Tell me what is that, and what do you hope to achieve in it?
Yeah. So I have spent a lot of time, most of my time, I would say, doing work everywhere else but home. I moved to New York when I was young. I travel a lot currently for work now. And I would go out into the world and bring people together and talk about issues in their communities and how to fix things and how to work together more collaboratively. And then just come home and leave again. And it occurred to me, I was like, I really want to put down my roots and give back to
Mm.
where I live, to the place where I
Oh,
was
okay.
raised. Yes. And so New Bayou is just that. You know, my family, a lot of us have roots in the Gulf Coast, Texas, and just looking at issues that are unique to this area and pulling together resources and assets, right, that are here and leveraging those to create solutions for the future. So I'm very excited about looking at that region, um, and just leveraging some of those approaches nationally and internationally once we are able to.
Yeah, I've often been called a bridge, right, between
Hmm.
sometimes the environmental communities and the
Yes.
utilities, and that's what you're doing, right?
Yes.
Between the advocates, right, and the communities that utilities and institutions, right, interact with, and helping both sides, frankly, right?
Exactly.
So we're going to
Exactly.
talk a little bit about both sides, what both sides maybe need to know and need to do differently to have the impact that they're going for and can help. So one of the things that I want to talk about is this idea of agency, right? And
Hmm.
we had a little conversation before
Yes.
the podcast about agency, and I want to, if you would explain what does it look like when a person has agency, and what does it
Mhm.
look like when they don't, right? And that's a big piece of
Yeah.
how they interact and what they receive from the companies in
That's a
their
really
neighborhood.
great question. You know, it comes to mind specifically in the space of community engagement. I think when someone has agency, they are equipped with the knowledge and skills to advocate for themselves, right?
Mm.
You're filling a gap with the assumption that that person is more than capable of picking up the mantle and fixing a problem for themselves, right?
Okay.
So
All right.
that looks like me going say, "Hey Carolyn, you know, there's this thing. Let me work with you in where you live to understand your system so that when you go talk to your council member, you're able to inform them on your opinion." That's a
And
very,
how it
very
how
different.
right. And the part about also knowing what's important to them, who you're talking to, right? The
Exactly.
system, because you can be explaining things that are important to you, but how does that person or that system meet that? That will have a lot to do about the impact you have,
A
right?
100%. 100%. You're so right. And it's like, it's not only understanding exactly like you said, how does this system work? What are some tools? But how you can identify the values of the person you're speaking to, and how can
That's
you
right.
leverage what somebody else's goals and vision to achieve your own. That is agency, right? And on the converse, it looks like someone, a community engagement person going into a community and just giving kind of one-sided information, very specific. This is what is going to
Mm.
happen and this is what you should do, right? It's not leaning into their skills or empowering people to use their own voice. It's them extracting information so they can go advocate on their behalf. And I don't want to be speak out of turn. I think that advocating on other people's behalf is extremely important. I love can't underscore the importance of an ally, but an ally is by no means the replacement for self advocacy.
Okay. I wanted to provide that baseline because that's really
Hmm.
important on where we're going to go with this. So, why do so many engagement efforts, even well-intentioned ones, get
Hmm.
stuck at the grass tops level?
Oh, because grassroots takes a long time.
Hmm.
Takes a lot of
Right. And
time.
we want things happening fast, right? And that ain't
We
going to happen that way.
Yes, we are in a culture where things need to move. We want things to move quickly. Um, and, trust is not a quick thing to establish. You've got to have a rapport with a person over a period of time and experiences before that's established. And so it's often more simple and straightforward to have a grass top solution where an entity, does a research, has a study, identifies a problem or a gap, and then proposes a solution based on best of class practices, right?
Yeah.
But the piece that's missing is that alignment with the people that they're serving. And that's a
Mm.
very, very, very important piece.
Huge piece. I've seen this over
Mhm,
and over when working, in between communities and let's just say corporations. But here's the thing, you say it takes time, and it does take
mhm,
time. But the
mhm,
thing is if you don't take that time, you're
mhm.
going to get it in the back end. You'll get community
Yes.
pushback. You'll get the lawyers lawyering up. You'll get the different advocacy groups coming down at you, and they're more sophisticated these days. So not doing that upfront work is actually going to create more work on the back end often,
100%.
right?
And the solution won't be effective, right? You'll spend
Right.
all that time going through all this effort, lawyering her up, et cetera, going through this, and then find that the solution doesn't work. We see this all the time. I know affordability is something that we talk about often. And one of the most recent studies that shows that only 6% of the billing solutions that already exist are being used, right? So there's a whole world,
6%. That's really small.
6%. And that's what happens when you have grass tops without the engagement.
Ah, got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. That's a real, I've never heard that statistic. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to have to sit with that one, right? Because that makes
6%.
sense. We have these variety of solutions. We're not activating them, and therefore we're having the same exact experiences over and
Conversation
over
exactly
again. Huh.
over and over.
Right. Um, what is in your experience one of the biggest misconceptions that utilities or institutions have about community engagement, right? And what do you wish they understood instead?
Sometimes people forget that lived experiences are a lot for people, right? If the only relationship you've ever had with someone has been contentious,
Hmm.
even if you have the best of intentions when you go into a conversation, it may not be successful the first time, right? You're going to have to listen a lot and do some work to build a rapport, right? Um, I think also another misconception is it always has to be serious. I mean, like, you can
Ooh.
go so far. We're humans. We're wired for food, fun, connection. like go to a community event and have a lot of fun and build that. Like that can go
Mm.
really far. It doesn't have to be hard, right? I think there's
Mm.
this notion that community engagement needs to be serious and hard and we're going to go in and we're going to do our thing and leave and it really doesn't need to be. If you forming connection really is that basis that makes things work. So focus on that instead of the outcome, right?
Yeah, I really love that because it brings it to a human level, right?
Right.
You're another person on the planet, right? You might have a high level job over here, but actually we're just when you're at an event, right? Community event, and you come that way, maybe in your genes, right? And you just
Yes.
relate on that level. Listening, even though you can't implement everything all the time, listening goes so far,
So far.
really listening and, taking it in. So that's really important. And then just lighten up. It doesn't have to be so
Yes.
serious. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Which brings me to that you've seen how intimidating, right? Public processes can be hearings,
Mhm.
right? Dockets,
Mhm.
testimony.
Mhm.
Um, what role do these informal relationship spaces play in preparing people to participate meaningfully in that, right? It feels like that could be a precursor, right? To when you have to get into, right, into the council meeting or what have you.
100%. No, you're spot on, Carolyn. These informal interactions really can make people feel more comfortable because instead of walking into a room full of people that they've never met before, speaking about a topic that they're unfamiliar with, it is now people that with whom they've interacted, right? They've at least seen them around. They're not as uncomfortable. The topics have been discussed, at least informally. So there's not this, unfamiliar elements where people can feel a little bit more confident about their position and understand what they have to offer. Um, and it creates a sense of mutual respect, right? When that
Yeah.
power dynamic has been shifted when you've been able to interact with someone before just walking into this really formal, intimidating
Where you
setting,
might have your
right?
dukes up about something, right?
Exactly. 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 And
So,
even if you do happen to disagree, you're seeing that person as a human who disagrees with you versus
right.
this entity with whom you must battle out and fight, right?
Yes. Yes. I've seen in situations where both sides have put protections around themselves, right?
Yes.
Like they don't, I've seen this, they don't
Mhm.
want to connect, not just the institution, let's say
Right.
the utility, but even the advocacy groups, right? These days, they're like they create that separation because I guess when you get on a human level, then you have to be human.
Yeah.
So I just want to call that out because it does
100%.
happen. And it's like we want to erode some of that too, so that there could be
Yes.
more meaningful dialogue and solutions. Do you
100%.
agree with that?
I do. It's so another one of the hats I wear. I'm a trained mediator, and
Okay.
conflict resolution is not something that's really taught. Like we're not taught how to disagree with someone and then communicate through that. You know, that people tend to
Mm,
either just really clash where they just blow it up. It's just all of a sudden, or they flee. Right? It's that fight or flight. Right? But it's difficult to train someone or to get someone to be like to just express themselves and then sit with it, and to own, hey, yes, I did this thing that created this conflict. I contributed to it. So I think accountability is another component that really it breaks down those barriers, right? When someone is willing to say to voice, this is how I feel, this is what you've done, this is what the action that you took, how it impacted me. And that person is willing to sit in that discomfort and then arrive at a place where they're like, yes, I did that and own it, right? Not defend it, just own it straight up. That does wonders. It really
wow.
does.
I have
It really
never
does.
seen that kind of training in my days in the energy space. And it might be out there, right? But getting that kind of training to be able to sit in the difficult, be in a difficult conversation, right? Without a defended action or way or even attitude.
Mhm.
It's so needed. You need to do that, Mary. And
Wow.
okay, pull out
Yeah.
that those skill sets because that alone can change it
Yes,
all, or
yes.
can
So
help change,
that
right?
is one of the core offerings of New Bayou. Right? We want to
Okay.
offer that restorative justice, um, like that approach of restorative justice, where we're not just community engagement, right, in the
Mm,
traditional sense, but community mediators and community builders to build that bridge, like you said, and train people on how to resolve that conflict so that we can come to better public services for everybody.
yeah. So I mean, restorative justice is an important part of your work. So why don't you just like, what is that, right? What does that
Mhm.
look like in practicality? And we actually named one way, right? Is having
Mhm.
that kind of, but like, how does that really play itself out? And how can it reinforce structural or procedural justice um,
Yeah.
in the
So, good
system?
question. So, restorative justice, and I'll actually back it up a little bit to look at the different types of energy, equity, and justice. So there's some justices called retributional justice are really about who's wrong, who's right,
Mhm.
and punishment, right? They're very much on like very strict, abstract, you broke the law, this is what you need, what the punishment is, right? That's not the idea behind restorative justice. Restorative justice is about repairing the relationship that was broken between the entities, right? So, for
Okay.
example, yes, and it can be very, very powerful, very powerful. So, while there is a right and a wrong, that is not the core that you're looking at. What you're looking at is how can we relate to one another to resolve this conflict that has been created? So, in the energy space, for example, I'll bring it back to the energy space um, was a lot of the transmission and distribution, deployment that was done and done without any regard to the communities that live there. Absolutely. Right?
Mm,
Did that have negatives? Did some of the siting of our generation, especially our power plants that are super polluting, have negative
yeah.
impacts on communities, especially disproportionately communities of color and low income? 100%. But restorative justice takes those that and instead of saying, okay, therefore you owe this or whatever, it says, okay, what broke there? Right?
Okay.
How did that system, how did those decisions come to be and how can we not make those decisions anymore? Right? And how
Mm,
can you sit in that discomfort, like you said earlier? How can we sit in that discomfort to hear the stories of those that have been impacted so that you can really understand, hey, I've got to take some accountability for what's happened before, and I've got to change that. And I've got to change my dynamic with my customers and with my community, right? So there's a lot of
mm,
utilities that are really starting to lean into it and public service providers. I feel like SMUD's an awesome example. I always love to use SMUD as an
they
example.
are. They are.
But they just had their
Oh,
annual
Shiloh.
sustainable. I love Shiloh. Yes, shout out to Shiloh and Jose
Shiloh
and Brandy and the
Costello.
whole team. Um, but yeah, they recently had their Sustainable Communities Partnership Summit, right? And where they emphasis on annual, like this has been an ongoing, this is an example of how like have decided to be rooted in the communities where they are. And they're sponsoring like education, right? STEM education and hosting Learn and Save with the food banks, right? Like they are really leaning into the relationships that they have with their communities, and those events, they're listening, right? They're listening to what they've done before and how they can improve and what they can do better, right? I
Okay.
think the city of Houston's another really good example. They have a response and recovery resilience committee. And they are really, really about moving at the speed of trust. In fact, they call it the build for good approach, where they say that the path for success is built on collaborating, right? Listening first and
Mm.
moving at that speed of trust. So restorative justice looks like really centering an approach where the processes and solutions that you're building only go as fast as your relationships can go, right? And they honor the relationship
Okay.
above everything else.
That's the speed of trust that we're
That's the
talking
speed of
about. I've
trust.
never heard that term. I love it.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's turn the tables a little bit, right? So we've been
Mhm.
talking about what institutions or utilities can do better, right? But what
Mhm.
can those communities do better? What do you think the biggest misconception they have or some have, and what do you wish they understood better?
You know, I don't know if it's a community doing better, if it's our education. Education's big. So,
Okay.
so big. And I say that because I have been, again, I alluded to this earlier. I used to go to public hearings all the time, and I was the one who worked for Austrian Energy and heard comments from the public, right? Um,
Ah,
and very often, a very high percentage of the time, the comments that were addressed to me were not relevant to anything that I did at all. They weren't relevant to Austin Energy. They weren't relevant to the conversation we were having. And it can be frustrating when when you're a person in that position, because we are all humans, um, to be patient, to hear hours after hours of genuine complaints that do need to be addressed, but have nothing to do with you, and you're fielding this anger and aggression. And so that's why education is really important, just so that people understand who does what, who does what. So I remember
yeah.
very vividly, we were at a council hearing, and there was a gentleman who was complaining about the mayor, the mayoral election coming up, and they were very upset about property taxes going up, and they were very upset about their Social Security, right? And I sat and I listened, um, patiently and quietly, and as soon as he finished, I was like, "I hear your concerns. Just want to point out, however, property taxes are the county tax assessor, right? That's their job. Social Security is on the federal level, that's Congress. So while we hear you, all of and how upset you are with the mayor about these genuine problems,
Mm,
the mayor isn't the person to fix that, right? That's totally outside of their jurisdiction. So that's what I mean when I say talking to the right
yeah.
person. It's like they getting really upset, but that person has nothing to do with the problem. And the other part of it is, sometimes in hearings, and I get it, where you're upset, you've been bottling it in for a long time, you finally have a chance to hear your voice heard. Given, depending on the circumstance, you may have had to get childcare and take a bus across town, so you're ready to say everything that is on your heart, right? You're ready because this may be one of the only chances you get to participate in a public forum like this. Um, and so I've experienced individuals just sharing everything. And so I think those two things, if helping communities, which is something I feel very proud, very passionately about, and will be focusing on with New Bayou, understand, is this the correct audience? And how do I really communicate relevant, timely feedback so that everything that I'm saying in this hearing can be used for the purpose of decision making?
Okay. Yeah. So I hear like know your audience, who you're talking, what's on the table right now, and how to be succinct about it to have the
Yes.
impact you're going for. Right.
Yes. Right.
So, Mary, as you look toward 2026, right, here we are, what themes are emerging in your work that feel most urgent?
Definitely coming home. Like I mentioned earlier, really looking at local issues, right? I think that change starts locally. And I know that I don't know whoever started it, but there's that act locally, think globally is a
Yeah, I
very
have
big
that bumper
word.
sticker, okay?
Exactly, exactly. And it's true. So really, I think the theme of like deep, meaningful impact, like less work, but more deeper, impactful work, um, is really important in this region. And also, again, I'm really leaning into restorative justice. I think that, I have been in this work for a long time, and I really want to elevate others. I want to elevate others, and I want to help repair relationships, um, so that there's not a small contingency of people advocating on behalf of the whole, but that people are educated and have access to systems so that they can create solutions that resonate with them. That is
Love
really
it.
important.
So, coming back around, like, how can people find out more about New Bio and your work?
Oh, so the website is under development. So right now I'm really urging people to connect on LinkedIn. I'm really excited to roll out some new things in 2026. And I would love to talk more about restorative justice and share some of the work that's coming out. Um, the link will be in the what do you
In our
call
show
it?
notes, yeah.
The show notes. Okay. But find my LinkedIn in the show notes, and very, very shortly you will see lots of new collateral coming out on our website, our LinkedIn pages, things of that nature. So yeah.
Okay. You're fantastic. So, if this conversation, speaking to
Mhm.
all of you, if this conversation resonated with you, especially if you work inside of a utility or a city or the regulatory system, I invite you to sit with two questions. Number one, where does engagement in your work live? At the Grasstops or the Grassroots? Be honest. Where does it live right now? And number two, as we enter 2026, what one step can you take to listen more before you design, to build relationships with the people who are affected most before you launch? What's that one step? Mary gave you lots of them today, right, on the show. So, what is that one thing that resonated with you? I would love if you would put that in our comments so we can all get inspired on how we could all step up our game. And if you haven't already, I'm going to ask you, please subscribe to Just Power. It keeps the very core piece of affordability, equity, reliability at the core of the show. So thank you so much for considering that. And as always, know we are all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.